The first thing I remember is the taste of metal hot, bitter, like someone had poured iron into my mouth and the billboard's red digits winking at me before the world folded in. I woke up with my hands full of divorce papers and a sky so bright it felt like punishment. In that instant, I knew two things. I had been betrayed, and I had been given an impossible, dangerous second chance. I stood at the bureau doors with the booklet trembling in my fist, and I saw them, Eric smiling like he'd been polished yesterday, Emily smoothing his tie with fingers that smelled of new perfume and triumph. My heart went cold, but the cold wasn't for them. It was for the 5 years I'd poured into him. I remember the way his eyes slid past me, the way he measured me like an expense that had run dry. "Grace," he said, like a man offering a receipt. That day, the humiliation finished me. I left in a fog. Driving, I felt every mile a loss of time, the city's lights indifferent. At a red light, a lottery shop's sign flashed. Jackpot $25.7 billion. I laughed at myself, stupidity tax. He'd called it and went in to burn $20. 10 quick picks. The owner barely glanced up. I stuffed the thin slips into my canvas bag beside the red certificate of endings and told myself this was the end of childish things. I should never have driven to the river that night, but grief makes fools of us. When the alert popped up on my phone, I thought it was a mistake. 5 winning tickets, $25.7 billion. My fingers were clumsy as I dug through that bag. One ticket matched, then the second, then the third, then all 5. The room swam. There was no triumphant scream, only a hollowing out. The money did not feel like rescue, it felt like an answer that asked for more questions. Keeping the win secret was the hardest thing I ever did. I didn't tell Sophie. I didn't tell anyone. I signed the papers at the state office wearing a mascot head for the photo and whispered to the lottery clerk to keep my private information locked. I watched the thin voucher held in my hand like a newborn bird and thought of all the ways wealth attracts vultures. So I distributed it into trusts, offshore allocations, low-profile investments. I kept a modest, quiet life while professionals tightened locks and NDAs like chains around the fortune. Secrets are fragile, the world only needs one careless hand. A week later, someone sent me a grainy screenshot. A local gossip page had a picture taken through the lottery office window, a blurred mascot head, a woman's silhouette. The shop owner where I'd bought the tickets had shown the slip to an old customer, bragging, and that customer was a cousin of Emily's mother-in-law. Small towns and mutual friends make fast, mean rumor mills. By the time I realized the leak existed, suspicion was already a rumor in Eric's ear. When Eric knew, greed turned ordinary cruelty into a plan. I should have seen the signs, the 2 men in the parking lot who asked too many questions, the mechanic who suddenly offered to check my brakes for free. They weren't amateurs. They had money behind them and an impatience that smelled like murder. The night on the old bridge was a precise cruelty. A rented van, bent metal at the right angle, a seam in the road that would flip a car if the brake line failed. They paid a mechanic to loosen the line days before and hired a driver to bump me at the slowest curve. It reads like a thriller because that's what it was: quiet, clinical, planned. I don't remember the impact in fragments. I remember a white canvas of light and then a sinking. I remember Sophie's scream and one hand that wasn't hers. I remember the smell of burnt tires and how the air sounded when it stopped moving. When death came, it was not dramatic. It was a clearing, a closing of a chapter I had no right to reopen. And then I opened my eyes to the same hateful sun, the same thin booklet, and the knowledge that time had given me one more run. Waking back at the bureau felt like a test. The world smelled the same. My hands were the same hands that had packed my life away. But my mind was full of the accident's small betrayals, of the mechanic's callous, of the look Emily gave Eric in the passenger seat. This was not a hallucination. It was a chance, brutal and precise. I had one do-over. The rules were simple and terrible. I carried memory and that burned need for justice. But the world would reset unless I chose differently. There would be no magic beyond the choices I could make. The first choice was silence. If I told Sophie everything, the news would leak in a different, less controllable way. If I went straight to the police with suspicions, I'd invite scrutiny into my private fortune and lay bait for vultures. Instead, I learned patience. I changed my clothes, but not to show off. I walked into the lottery office again, masked, played the part of the quiet winner, and this time I left with a plan and a team that could think in chess, not in revenge theater. I set up a private investigation in secret, not to stalk Eric, but to build a web of evidence. The PI I hired was a woman Eric had once fired with a brusque email. She owed me a favor from a kindness I'd offered years ago. Her name was Mai, sharp and practical, and she confirmed the mechanic's payments, the suspicious calls, and most damningly, the little paper trail that led to the parking lot men. Emily had not acted alone. She'd paid a fixer who liked to brag about his jobs. Mai watched patterns and stitched them into proof. While Mai worked, I shifted the money into safe hands and opened small, deliberate accounts to look like ordinary income. I bought a modest apartment in a discreet building and replaced that Corolla with a mid-range Volvo that screamed comfort, not excess. I let Sophie think a mysterious client had given me a big project. She had to think I suddenly had a windfall and nothing more. It calmed her. It calmed me, in a way, to see her breathe easier. But beneath the measured days, I was building a far more volatile strategy. People underestimate the power of being underestimated. I let Eric parade Emily at the reunion because I wanted him to show his hand. The high school group chat lit up with his smug posts like bait. He wanted applause, and I decided to give him a show on my terms. I went to the reunion quietly, wearing a simple black dress that spoke of class and restraint. I let their surprise wash over me. His smugness when he introduced Emily should have been a dagger, but instead it was a reveal I'd been scripting. At the table he jabbed, all thin courtesy, "Grace, there's a clerk job open if you're interested." A public insult wrapped in fake concern. I let the silence sit like a hot stone. Then I dropped my first small bomb. "I am busy with a project in the South City New District," I said, casual as pouring water. His face twitched. He knew construction talk. It hit a nerve, but I didn't invent the information. I had built access. Part of the money had gone into a legal stake in a small land parcel, and a consultant I'd quietly engaged sent me a verified memo about a strategic metro extension. It was true, and it burned him. He tried to hide it, to laugh, to belittle the source. But the thing with truth is, it settles like dust and then it clogs the engine of lies. The reunion's whispers turned. Friends who smiled at him a moment before now looked at his face as if for the first time. I saw the vanity crack. Of course, when he started calling and begging, I blocked him. Let him make a spectacle. Let him show the world what he was. 3 months later, he would be the one at my door, ragged and ashamed, asking to be taken back for the wrong reasons. But that was later. For now, I walked away from the reunion with Sophie's arm in mine and a cool, terrible plan warming in my chest. I had learned the rules of this second life: be quiet, gather proof, protect the money, and let karma work with a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. The moment Eric showed up at my building that evening, I knew the game had changed, and this time I was the one holding the board. He looked smaller than in his Instagram photos, suit rumpled, voice thin with shame and greed tangled together. He begged like a man who'd lost not just money but face, and for the first time I felt nothing but clean, sharp contempt. He wanted to remarry, to fix things, to stitch himself back into my life because I had become useful again. I closed the lobby doors on him without a tremor. When he left, Emily called. Her voice was high and practiced. She sounded like someone who'd rehearsed tenderness and passed for sincerity. "Grace, we can all move on," she cooed, as if the years I'd spent were a minor inconvenience. I did not yell. I did not cry. I let the call ring out, and the silence afterward tasted of iron. Not anger, but decision. Revenge would not be loud or messy. It would be precise, like a surgeon removing a tumor while leaving the organs intact. I tightened the circle around the real players. Mai turned up the heat faster than I expected. The fixer who'd bragged, the mechanic who'd been paid for maintenance, the driver who'd taken the cash and done the job. We had bank transfers, a receipt for brake pads bought on a specific date, a text message where someone joked about making the problem disappear. It was ugly and clinical and human. It was also proof. When Eric's calls turned into threats, I had paper to answer them with. That is power. Documentation that turns conversation into evidence. I staged a simple trap and watched it work. Not a trap of violence. I didn't want to be the kind of person who burned lives down just to feel vindicated, but a legal snare. I let Eric think I was still the broken woman who valued peace over confrontation. I leaked nothing. Instead, I fed the right whispers to the right ears. A discreet journalist who hated him for an old slight got a tip, a small, tidy packet of the mechanic's records and a few photos of the fixer's meetings. Overnight, it became a story that smelled of scandal rather than gossip. an attempted hit, a trail of paid hands, a man who traded marriage for money. The news did more than humiliate him. It made the police pick up the file they'd half-heartedly shelved before. The detective assigned to the case had seen worse and smelled nettles in every rich man's backyard. He wanted to close the loop. Under pressure and with a prosecutor who liked quick victories, Eric's fixer flipped. The driver spilled the names. The mechanic's wallet smelled of cigarettes and fear. He confessed to loosening the brake line and named who paid him. I watched the courtroom drama unfold like a play where I had the final act to write. My heart stuttered in those days, not from fear but from the strange, new tenderness of justice working its slow, inevitable gears. When Eric's trial began, people who'd once patted his ego now glanced away. He tried to plead ignorance, to paint himself as a man who'd been too proud to know the details of his own schemes. It didn't stick. The evidence spoke in cold numbers and damning messages. When the judge read the sentence, Eric's face finally showed the depth of his loss. Stripped titles, restitution payments, a prison sentence long enough to be felt. Emily, who had smiled in public, faced charges for conspiracy. The world had flipped and I was standing steady on the other side. But victory was not the finish line. It was a threshold. I had chased justice because I could not abide cowardice disguised as love. Yet every night I lay awake wondering if the measure of my life would be headlines and fines, or whether I could build something that outlived revenge. The money had been the tool, but it was not the masterpiece. So I did the scariest thing. I turned outward. I set up Time's studio with a simple mission: revive artisans, preserve small cultural crafts, give markets to hands that would otherwise be empty and old patterns that would otherwise vanish. Opening the studio felt like breathing after being underwater for years. Our first cohort were women who dyed cloth with fingers stained by indigo, men who carved wooden toys with weathered hands, a grandmother who still embroidered the patterns. My grandmother used to hum while cooking. I did not want to buy their souls. I wanted to lift their work into a new world. We branded, we packaged, we told their stories. The accounts were lean at first, sensible and guarded, then steady. The studio's small showroom smelled of varnish and tea and something quietly hopeful. Sophie's laugh came back to me in full over the months. She had the first slice of the new office cake and cried in the doorway. The old wounds did not vanish overnight, but the bright daily work sutured things slowly. People sent messages thanking us for keeping a skill alive, for placing a scarf in an artisan's pocket that could warm a child's winter. Grace meant favor. Now it meant action. That irony pleased me like a private joke. Then the Hope Elementary letter arrived. A small village school I'd helped fund not because I wanted applause, but because the children's laughter that Sophie forwarded to me in a shaky, grateful voice was the sweetest confirmation I could ever ask for. The plaque bore my name in modest, carved letters. I ran my fingers over them until they warmed. I thought of the divorce booklet and the lottery ticket, those two slips of paper that had been the hinge between one life and another. I framed them side by side on my desk in a rustic wooden frame. Red and black, ending and beginning, proof that stories could have both. Sometimes, in the quiet hours when the city hummed and the studio lights were low, I would pull the frame close and feel the tug of what might have been had I not been given that impossible second chance. I would think of Eric, of Emily, of the cheap cruelty that had almost been my endpoint. I did not feel joy at their downfall. I felt a stump of grief, a place where years had been cut away. But I also felt fierce gratitude for the chance to take those years and build differently. The final twist, the last, satisfying turn was quiet and small. One morning, a woman walked into the studio with a basket of dyed cloth and a child clinging to her skirt. She knelt and looked at me like someone seeing a future reflected in plain glass. "My mother," she said, voice thick, "used to sell these in the market before the floods. I thought they were gone forever." I knelt too and promised her space on our next showcase. When she left, the child waved and the woman mouthed, "Thank you, Grace." In that flicker I understood that my rebirth had not been about punishment alone. It was about using what I had to open doors for others. I still frame the divorce booklet and the ticket. I still carry memory, the taste of metal, the flash of digits, the cold faces. But those things no longer define me. I walk through my studio each morning with a cup of coffee and people around me who remember why work matters. Sometimes Sophie texts a photo of children in winter coats we help send out. Sometimes I answer Eric's old number when it rings just to block it and feel a small, private triumph. The city moves forward. I move with it. In the end, the rebirth was not a magic fix. It was a brutal, merciless chance to choose who I wanted to be when the credits rolled. I chose to be someone who builds, who protects, who gives back. The justice I carved out for myself was not simply revenge. It was a realignment of the scales. I used the fortune to buy dignity for those who'd been ignored, and in doing so I found a peace that was quieter and truer than any victory I could have imagined.